Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report. In a historic proceeding, Utah's members of Congress cast their votes on the articles of impeachment. New polling reveals the potential ramifications of these votes and the impact on upcoming elections. And despite the discord in Washington, leaders continue to tackle the tough issues that impact our state.
Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Heidi Hatch, anchor with KUTV, Lisa Riley Roche, reporter with the Deseret News, and Rod Arquette, host of the Rod Arquette Show. Thank you so much for being with us today. The news never seems to stop. But we have some movement on the issue we've been following on the program here on impeachment. Heidi, we had an actual vote in the House. The vote was to impeach on two articles, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Any surprises in the vote or in the proceedings? The
only thing that truly surprised me on the votes was that Tulsi Gabbard, who is running for president, chose to vote present. But here in Utah, I think everyone was watching Ben McAdams very carefully to see which way he would vote. We all elect our congressional leaders to vote their conscience, but we know that sometimes your conscience isn't the only one involved because there's always an election around the corner when you're in the House. So I think some people were surprised by the fact that he did vote for impeachment, but he was very quiet about it. He had his press conference and then he laid low. Yeah. But the money will flow because of it.
Well, I want to get to a couple of great points. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I was going to say that the press conference itself was fascinating, right? I mean, here's Ben McAdams calling the press together in Murray to at the City Hall chambers to announce his decision. We're told right before he comes out, there'll be no questions. He steps out, he reads a statement, and walks away. Mm-hmm. No questions, no discussion. Where you've seen other members of Congress who are in a similar position, Democrats in a district that had been won by Trump in 2016, make that kind of an announcement at a town hall meeting and interact with voters. So there was a little hesitancy on his part to really own that, I think.
Okay, I think we better explore why. Okay, go ahead, Rod.
Speaking of the hesitancy, if you watched his statement, he slipped in the line, and by the way, yes, I will vote yes. I mean, it just kind of was surrounded by all this. We're divided. We need to come together. We need to look at the big issues of the day. And yes, I'm going to vote on impeachment. I mean, I just found that fascinating. And picking up on Lisa's point, a lot of the Democrats, or at least two of them, made the announcement at town hall meetings, and they got ridiculed and attacked, but they answered the questions. And Ben McAdams, I'm going to give a speech and I'm going to leave. And that's what he did.
Not even answering
media questions. He didn't want to engage.
And I think voters want to hear them explain themselves. And I think he's trying to toe such a very careful line for re-election that he doesn't want to step in the wrong direction either way. But I think sometimes not answering questions, we learned from Mia Love, is a step in the wrong direction.
Well, look, can we read a quote from Ben McAdams? Because he talked a lot about what he thinks his duty is. I want to get to a couple points you just made. Ben McAdams said, "My duty is to the Constitution and our country. What the president did was wrong. His actions warrant accountability. I cannot turn a blind eye, thereby condoning this president and future presidents, Republican or Democrat, to do the same." So, Lisa, with this quote in mind, I was kind of curious about this point that Heidi made a second ago, too. So you want them to vote their conscience, which is what he was talking about, right? But how do you square that issue with, I got to be reelected also?
Well, you square it by looking at what voters in Utah think about the president and his actions, right? There's a new UtahPolicy.com poll that suggests that Utahns are pretty evenly split on not just impeachment, which happens in the House, but removal from office that happens in the Senate. So the fact that in one of the most Republican states in the country, Utahns still aren't sure whether or not the president needs not just to be impeached again, but to go, suggests that there may be more room for McAdams. And another UtahPolicy.com poll suggested that in his district, unlike the other three House districts, that more Utahns would back him. It was an awkward question, so I have to phrase this just right. More Utahns would support him more for voting for impeachment than would support him less for voting against impeachment.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in 2020 with the election as a result of his vote. You've got an open seat in the 1st District, and you've got McAdams in the 4th District. Will we see Donald Trump in Utah in 2020 coming here to, support and uphold that 1st District, make sure it goes Republican, and it most likely will, but see what he can do to influence that? There's a lot of money that has already been spent here by special groups going after McAdams. It'll be interesting to watch the money flow here as well.
Yeah. But some of those groups aren't targeting McAdams right now, which I thought was interesting. One in particular had already spent a good bit of money here on TV, announced another round of ads at post-impeachment vote, and Utah was not on the list. And at the same time, Democrats are coming in and advertising not vote for McAdams, but look at all the great work McAdams is doing on other issues, support him in that.
Yeah, the money will come, though. Utah Democrats already started yesterday saying that they didn't really want to play into the emotions of the impeachment vote, but they were playing into the emotions of the impeachment vote. They want your money, and not only do they want your money locally, but I think that McAdams secured his national funding as we come up to the fight this next fall, where the money will be pouring in. There's going to be a lot of money in that 4th District race.
Yeah, he had to look at that. He had to look at the national funding, because if he would have said no, how much would the DNC and the national money had been coming in? So I think he secured the money route by saying yes, at least on the Democratic side, but he may have increased it on the Republican money side as well.
Do you think that would have been the case if he had voted against impeachment? What would have been the result?
You look at it. The Democrats losing control of the House, I think, is really out there. I think it's pretty secure for the Democrats. The question would be, would Pelosi and say we need to save this seat as well, or we can let this one go because he voted no? So we'll see what happens.
Well, we've got to remember, too, though, that that's always a plus and minus for Democrats in Utah, right? If Democrats come on strong for him here, that actually could hurt him with some voters, right? Tying him closely to Pelosi, tying him closely to national Democratic goals and ideals. So that's another fine line he's got to walk. He wants that support, and he certainly doesn't want opposition, but he doesn't want too much of an endorsement from the national party.
That's the fine line, right? How about for our other members of Congress, Heidi? Because Stewart, Bishop, Curtis all voted against.
That's right, but the only one that we really heard speaking out loudly is the one that we've heard all along. Chris Stewart's become, I think, one of the loudest mouthpieces for the president. He actually spoke in the hearings. Bishop did not. I think we got his first statement at around 9 o'clock after the votes had come out. And Curtis had come out a little earlier with a videotape statement a couple days before, saying why he'd chosen not to, because he felt like they hadn't come up with the right reasons to impeach. They weren't the things to vote on. So everyone seems to be laying a little bit low, except for Chris Stewart. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out coming up in this next election. Do you want the president on your side? Like you mentioned, do we want him in the state of Utah? And I think it's a tough question. I think that this next election, people might let the president come in. I don't know if that would have helped Mia Love cross the line or not, but she lost by less than 700 votes. And last time around, we saw about 45% of the state voting for President Trump. I think that this time around, I would wage a bet that there might be a little bit more support, oddly enough, after the impeachment, because we're not going to have an Evan McMullin to vote for. And people are going to be stuck with a decision of which way they want to go this time without maybe that gray middle ground they can go for.
Now, Lisa, this is already having implications. There are challengers to Ben McAdams lining up already, right?
There is a young progressive Democrat who's expressed interest in running. So you could see McAdams in a position where he has to fight off a challenger for the nomination. Because remember, with SB 54, candidates can just gather signatures and get on the ballot and force someone, an incumbent, for example, into a primary. So if we see that, it could be the same position that Jim Matheson was in at one point.
And I think the Republicans got to come up with a strong challenger. I don't think there are a lot of challengers out there, a lot of people lining up to try and get that Republican nod, but I haven't seen anyone surge ahead. I mean, people don't know who a lot of these people are. Ben McAdams is well known, and the Republican challengers, I think, have got a lot of work to do to get in front of the public, say, here's who we are, and here's the direction we'd like to take the country. And I don't see any of that group emerging as the strongest yet.
Yeah, there's very little name recognition in that race right now, so I think it's going to be a fight to get to the top. I think that Jay McFarland might sort of had the most name recognition, but only within his listeners on the radio. And those are very small groups, too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think Mia Love actually mentioned before Dan Hemmert got into the race, if she didn't feel like there was someone strong enough that she might go for it again, which might be interesting to see.
She did tell me that.
She said maybe? Yeah.
She's saying there's a chance.
Exactly. No, her concern was getting that seat back for Republicans. And she did mention Dan Hemmert, the state Senate Majority Whip, as one of the candidates that she thought could run a good race. And indeed, he had more money. He had almost $250,000 raised. He had loaned his campaign almost $200,000. He certainly seemed poised to run a strong race, even though, as you say, Heidi, he didn't have much name recognition, but that kind of money can buy it, right?
And now he's out.
And he dropped out, saying he needs to spend more time with his business. So I think Republicans should find that a little troubling, that here's somebody who had been recognized nationally for his ability to challenge McAdams, right? Stepping out of the race. What happens now?
Yeah. I think if Mia Love steps into the race, they are going to give the re-election of Ben McAdams will happen. I think she has ticked off enough Trump supporters in that district that if she's on the ballot, they won't vote in that race.
Interesting. One more piece on the impeachment proceedings, because in theory this now goes to the Senate, right? But it hasn't yet, which is so interesting. Is what are the implications, Heidi, with our Senate? Because we don't know where Mitt Romney might be on this one necessarily.
He's a wild card. Right now, though, I think we're waiting, and we're in that weird spot with the gamesmanship going on, and everyone's waiting to see when Pelosi will hand it over to the Senate. And Senator Romney's been so outspoken against the president on so many matters, going from his run through his presidency. I think there's a lot of people watching and waiting to see what he will do, both on Republicans and Democrats' side. I don't think they're going to garner the vote to get to that 2/3, but I think Romney could make a very loud statement, and he's not in a position where he's thinking, I've got to run again. He's got a 6 years. He's older already. I don't know that he's going to be looking to run 3 or 4 times. So he really is at a point where he can do what he wants, but what he wants to do, I don't know yet. He might still be in the decision-making process.
It's the line tactic on the part of Pelosi. I think what Schumer is hoping to do is to see if he can get 3 or 4 Republican senators like Romney, Collins, and Murkowski to agree with him to expand or change the rules a little bit as to the witnesses that could testify during the trial. So he's hoping during this period he can convince them. All Schumer needs is 51 votes to say, here's what the rules should be. And he's hoping that he can bring people like Romney and Collins Murkowski around to see if, in fact, they can set the rules. And it's interesting that Nancy Pelosi is telling the Senate, we aren't going to play unless you play by my rules.
Yeah. Lisa, what do you make of that? Because it's true, Nancy Pelosi has not submitted the articles of impeachment to the Senate. But maybe while you're about to answer that question, I want to talk about what Mike Lee said this week, because it's pretty sharp about this very event and Nancy Pelosi. When asked what happens next, he said, "What happens is nothing. It lands with a thud. It's like a tree that falls in the forest with no one there to hear it. I do not understand why she did what she did, but it makes no sense." How does it make sense?
Well, that's exactly why I think she did what she did, right? Because had she just turned over those articles of impeachment as quickly as possible, it would be up to the Senate to decide how much attention to give them. And it's not clear, right, what the president wants, because Mitch McConnell has made it crystal clear he'll do whatever Trump wants. And the president seems to vacillate between, let's just get this over with, and I want a full-scale trial. And a full-scale trial is what would benefit the Democrats in this case, right? It keeps the whole impeachment issue alive. It helps the public understand even better why Democrats in the House did what they did. So sending it over right away would have allowed it just to fall with a thud. But holding it back, we're talking about it. We're going to keep talking about it till it gets there.
Although that may not be a good thing. I think there might be some exhaustion coming in. I looked at the TV ratings just in Utah from the day of the impeachment hearings. There were not a lot of people watching. Finally, at 10 o'clock at the end of the day, people tuned in because they wanted to hear the end of it. But Democrats risk just making people just say, I don't want to hear it anymore, and just walking away too. So there's a happy medium that's in there, because I think that there's a very small percentage, and I think there is maybe about 30% of people who are really tuning in, following every step, and the rest of them are like, tell me when it's over.
And the Constitution is not clear on what she can and cannot do. It doesn't give her a timeline. It doesn't say anything. So you're going to get the scholarly debate as to whether or not what she's doing is constitutional, because there's no clear definition, no timeline on when she has to turn these articles of impeachment over to the Senate.
Well, and there's also a question about the impact on the presidential race, because one of the issues with having a protracted Senate trial is that you tie up the senators who are running for president on the Democratic side, right?
Yeah, you do.
And because Bernie Sanders hasn't been, I think, in the Senate chamber since June, and he'd have to go back and do.
They would have to stay.
Yeah,
they would have to
stay.
Exactly, and they're in a position, because they're supposed to be impartial jurors, that they can't come out and talk to the TV cameras every day about how they feel about this. So it kind of takes them out of the picture for a little while on what would at that point be a key issue for voters. So with the first primary in first week of February in Iowa, the first caucus, and then followed by New Hampshire, and then Nevada, South Carolina, and then Utah, and the other Super Tuesday states, the start of March, that's got to be part of this calculation. How does this impact the Democratic candidates?
You would think they'd be saying, can we get this over? Because I need to get back out on the campaign trail.
There will be a moment there where they'll say that. So great strategist all the way around for all of you. Let's talk about another race locally, the race for governor. That one is really heating up, and we have a couple people who are already in, some may be about to announce. Let's talk about that. So Lisa, I know you did some reporting on this one too. So in the most recent poll that we have, this is from Utah Policy, it put Spencer Cox at 41%, Huntsman at 29%, John Huntsman at 29%. And then, interesting, even Rob Bishop, who hasn't indicated he's going to, was at 9%, Amy Winter-Newton at 6%, Birmingham at 5%, Greg Hughes at 5%, Sean Reyes, who has told us he's not running, at 5%, Thomas Wright at 1%. Tell us about the results of this poll.
Well, it was of Republican voters, and it indicates Cox's lead over Huntsman among just Republican voters is growing. But let's remember, it's early. It's really early for the governor's race. And as you say, some of those candidates haven't even announced yet. For example, Greg Hughes, who had, over $500,000 in the bank earlier this year, and is not shy when it comes to getting out there on the campaign trail and saying what he thinks about issues. So we haven't really, I think, engaged the public at large yet. And what's interesting to me about the polling of just Republicans is that, yes, we have closed primaries in Utah, closed Republican primaries. Democrats allow anyone to vote. But Republicans, you have to be registered as a Republican. But there's nothing that prevents an independent or a Democrat from going to the polls and registering as a Republican and voting in that election.
That's such an interesting point. Go ahead,
and do those Democrats go and vote for Spencer Cox or John Huntsman Jr.? I mean, that's going to be real interesting to see.
Yes.
And I've talked to a lot of people where I think Republicans in the state with the closed primary, they're worried that Democrats will come in there and vote for the weakest person, that their guy could win. But I don't think that's what happens. I've talked to a lot of people who are actually fairly new to the state. When they learn that it's a closed primary, they actually file as Republicans, and they go in there and they try to vote for someone who's maybe a little more centrist, or where they think that they would like to ultimately vote for, knowing that the Democrat likely isn't going to win. And so I think there's a lot of those people who are not getting polled right now. And I think when you have this many candidates, the numbers are so spread out too that you may see more numbers that will congeal towards a candidate. I also think there might be one or two of these candidates in the mix who are running to be chosen as a lieutenant governor. And as soon as you pull their numbers out and add it on to someone else, because it's all about addition, then those numbers kind of shift around a little.
It goes back to what we were talking about with the 4th district race. If there is a serious challenge to Ben McAdams, obviously those Democrats are going to vote in the Democratic primary. But if there's not, we haven't even heard of any Democrats emerging as a potential candidate for governor, right?
No.
Let alone an intra-party challenge there. So you're a Democrat. You want to see the best you can hope for in the state as governor. you look at the Republicans and you make your choice.
Yeah. Well, as Lisa said, it's very, very early. John Huntsman hasn't been in the state for, what, 10 years? I'm waiting for him to start singing Getting to Know You, because I think he's got to reacquaint voters here in the state of Utah with what he did. When he left, his popularity here in the state was massive. He'd done a lot of things, and he's got to start reminding voters, this is what I did when I was governor, and we can do it again.
Rod,
and he hasn't done that yet.
What do you think about these comments here about like some of these Democrats or some of these independents or unaffiliated voters that may affiliate for a primary, for example? Is that likely to occur? And maybe this poll doesn't really give that full flavor then.
Yeah, I don't know the extent. I think it may happen, but the extent and how many will do that is going to be interesting to see if, in fact, that takes place. They may. It's just very early to say right now. Oh. And the other factor that the name that hasn't come up here is, what is Rob Bishop going to do?
And what's he going to do?
Don't know. You know, he told me about 2 months ago, he's made up his mind. I said, okay, what is it? And he said, that was it? I made up my mind. You know, so if through the convention, Rob Bishop, I think, would be a very strong candidate in the convention setting.
So he's one. So you mentioned Greg Hughes may announce soon.
When is he going to announce? I mean, it's been rumored for how long?
Sources close to me say if you can get through the holidays, maybe give it a week. When everyone's back at work, you'll see him out there announcing.
Okay. I'm hearing other candidates are looking at early January in the 4th District race, and it makes sense for governor, too.
Okay, so that's one. Thomas Wright?
I think he might be waiting and still weighing the waters to see. There's just a lot of big names in this race, and usually, I mean, we don't always have an open seat, but there's a lot of big names, and there's people who have currency with their names or currency in the caucus or at the convention. And I think he might be one of those that has currency with the really strict members of the party. So it'll be interesting to see if he actually throws his hat in the ring.
Because there's a play for him there with that section of the party, right? I mean, is this plurality issue is going to be maybe the issue of this election, right? When you have so many candidates, how many pull what votes and what percentage do you need to win? So what do you think?
If they all last to the ballot, let's remember that our presidential primary is March, but our intra-party primaries aren't until June. So. A lot can happen between now and then.
And it will.
And it's a lot about money. Always comes down to money.
It does.
And we know there are a few candidates who have a lot of money.
It makes the world go round.
Okay. So why don't we talk about money? So interesting. Our legislature passed tax reform. All right, so this is sitting on the books right now, maybe with some changes coming. But Heidi, we already have referendums. We had two. One died.
And then
turns out you have to be a voter.
One is out there still, and it's a big ask to make this happen. They have, I think, till January 21st to get a lot of signatures. So whether or not they can pull it off is the big question. So I think people are watching that. I think there's a lot of people who are willing to sign for them, though. I don't know that anyone loved how the tax reform went down. I don't know who really won in the end here, because there was a tax cut, but were we going after a tax cut, or were we looking to spread the wealth in different places? So you made people angry over gas taxes and food taxes, and then you gave everybody a little bit of money back, but is it enough in their paycheck they're going to get any capital out of that? I think people are willing to sign, but can you get enough people out there knocking the doors and getting it? That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. You just wrote about this story this morning, Lisa.
What's interesting to me, a legislative leader told me privately that having more than 10,000 people on the private Facebook page set up by the organizer of this referendum, a little troubling. It suggests that there might really be some support for a referendum. And it is tough to get these signatures. It's nearly 116,000. You've got to get them proportionately in 15 of 29 counties. And as Heidi said, by January 21st. But if you have 10,000 people, if even half of them get out there and gather a good number of signatures, sorry, there's math involved, they possibly could do it. And what really happens here is it creates uncertainty and doubt during the legislative session that starts in late January when they're preparing the budget. Do we go forward with the budget based on these tax cuts and then these tax increases on food, on gas, on some services? Or do we create some kind of a backup plan? And even more importantly, at the last minute, to sell tax reform to members, Republican legislative leaders came up with this idea of giving checks out to Utahns, low and moderate income Utahns. The first check would be sort of a rebate for the extra money Utahns have had to pay because of the dependent exemption being lower than it needed to be to make up for the federal tax cuts a few years ago. The second one would be for those earning below the federal poverty level who are going to have to pay tax on their food purchases now. It's the grocery tax. They're calling it a prebate of that money. The first round of checks, about $60 million, would go out in February or March, again to Utahns who claim dependence on their last tax return. I think the income limit was about $70,000 for a family of 4, and then the ones going out to the poor on the grocery tax would be in July. But what do? Do you cut those checks and send them out, and then the referendum repeals that?
I mean, Rod, what does happen there with what Lisa just said? So if the referendum goes forward, everything's in flux, right?
Yeah, everything is in flux. I think the question of the referendum going forward is going to be a huge hill to climb. The rules changed after Prop 2 and Prop 3, medical marijuana, Medicaid expansion. They changed the rules on getting a referendum on the ballot the other day. I spoke with Fred Cox on my radio show just the other day. He was looking for someone just to help pay to print the packets that they've got to take around. Yeah. So, I mean, it is a huge hill to climb, and they've only got till January 21st to do so. But I think I agree with Lisa. If lawmakers see, and the Facebook and the Facebook likes on their website has jumped and continues to grow every day, lawmakers look at that and go, you know.
Yeah, Heidi, the last couple of seconds here, what are they saying to you?
You know, I think that people, are still somewhat confused about what happened, and I think that there's some frustration, too, in that this is going to go in 60 days later because they didn't get enough votes, that people are wondering, okay, well, how much am I going to get in my paycheck? How is this going to work out? And I think everyone's trying to figure out their math in their head, and when people are trying to figure out their math, they're not happy.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Great analysis tonight. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast on pbsutah.org/Hinckley Report or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.